Guys, welcome back to the channel and our classic Mini rebuild, which is starting to finally look like a Mini again. Last week, we had a go at fabricating our own inner sills as well as dealing with the inner arch that had rusted out. So if you haven't seen that episode, make sure you jump back to have a look. A lot has been going on this week. I'm not entirely sure which day this video is going to come out, but we have a lot of new panels to put on the car. 14, in fact. 14 new panels. As well as that, we've also got the new, to me, fiberglass front end to go on as well. So my brain is kind of exploding, trying to figure out what order I should do this in. Should I put the floors in first? Should I drop the engine and gearbox out of the car so we can do all the metal work without that being in the way? Lots of questions, not too many answers, but let's jump into this week's video and see how I got on. I started by securing either end of the heel board with a few plug welds. Once I'd completed that, I then focused on the tunnel area of the heel board, making sure that was secure and nicely tight against the rest of the work. This meant I could leave the floorboard areas for a later date. Heel board is on the car, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but it looks like it's going right. Let's jump underneath and I'll show you what I've been doing. So, just starting on the corners, but got everything fitted up here now. One part of the jigsaw puzzle that I did not have was this tiny little bracket and this closing section. I bought these from P&L Minis, and then this has just been fabricated by my own beautiful hands, and it is all looking fairly good. It did mean that I had to straighten up the bottom of the arch because that wasn't quite right, and then that just allowed me to kind of start getting things fitted up. You can see the amount of holes I've drilled in here, and I don't know what is standard, what is factory, but given that we are going to be plug welding this rather than spot welding, and I don't plan on doing this any time again in the near future, I wanted a really, really good bond. One issue I had is just here, the floor wasn't sitting on the bottom of the heel board, and I went home and basically had a good think about why that was, and I knew that my heel board was completely straight because it's new and it's factory and it's heritage. So that got me thinking about the crash that I had and the fact that I'd traveled over a few rather large boulders, and I came to the conclusion that the floor must have got bent up a bit. So I moved this entire Mini like a wheelbarrow, just picked it up and scooched it along and dropped it back down onto where the heel board is. So rather than having the pressure in the middle of the car, I've now dropped it on here. Because I had that pressure, I was able to climb inside, give the back of the boot floor, which I will be replacing, a bit of a stamp just to make sure everything was lining up, and now it does. Basically, all the work that I've done so far on the car has really got me thinking about the state of the rest of it, and you know, what a surprise, I've found other issues. At the start of this video, you did see I've picked up new boot floors, well, not boot floors, new floors apart from other things. And the reason for that is this car, it was in a crash where it scooted over those boulders. There are also really bad areas of rust and terrible patch jobs that have happened by the previous owner in the front footwells. So I want to make sure all of that stuff is absolutely done correctly to the best of my abilities before I get into kind of painting it and doing other things. I want it to be structurally sound. So we can see here on the inner front footwells there, this is just absolutely terrible in terms of what water catchment. You can see here it's been one patch, another patch. The inner arches on the front of the car really don't seem to be bad, but I want to fix all of this. And if you look here, that is also going to need sorting out. If we look on the other side, you can see a similar story. And one of the reasons for that is the inner sills, the oversills that have gone on the vehicle have rotted the car out all the way along there, and basically the same all the way along here So now that we've got all of the heel board sorted out, I've decided to tackle this outer wing. And the reason for that is I've got a lot more structure back into the body again, and I felt a lot more confident about just taking out this section. It's Friday night. It's taken me an hour to get this cleaned out and ready to dry fit in the outer wing. Getting this aftermarket panel to fit on the rear arch of the vehicle took a lot of thinking about. You had to go between the car and the table multiple times to get your cuts exactly right. As well as that, you've got to think about future work and what jobs may be easier whilst the side of the car is still open. We've got our outer wing, and this here I've just fabricated up is a little closing panel. So essentially this closes up the inner of the car to the outer of the car, and I've already done the other side, but what I realized is it's much easier to do this whilst we've got all of this access here. So I'm going to spot weld this on, spot weld it on at the back as well. I'm going to leave this front edge until we've got the outer wing done, and then I've got a little bit of movement to play around with there. And then finally, I've cut these holes here. So this is our little final finishing piece, and this will basically join between the inner and the outer wing. So I can knock this if I need to get a bit more of an angle on it. And if you look on the back of this as well, if you can see that, but there's a bit of an angle, so that will literally stick on the inner wing and it will give us that close, and that should be everything we need to do in that corner. Now don't get me wrong, working on these classics requires a methodical way of working that I definitely struggle with sometimes. However, this was the final fitment for the panel to get it ready for welding. You can see the amount of butt weld clamps I've used to get this perfectly put into place, and I started from the bottom corner and worked my way forwards. Right guys, before we crack on with finishing off this panel, there's something I want to show you which is super important for butt welding, and it's something I've learned as a beginner, but I think something that you'll find really, really useful. So, butt welds, when we're doing them, I've a couple of drawings here. If you imagine you've got two bits of metal like this, and let's get you in a bit closer, and they're touching each other, right? So when you're welding, this is our weld tip here, you're coming on and you're just getting this kind of little bit of weld on the top of your two butt welds, right? So that's one way that people tend to do it. The other way that you can do it is like this. So this circle here actually represents a gap in the metal. So our metal would stop here and here. This gap, we're talking less than 1 mil. So there's not much of a gap there, but there's a gap there. And the reason for that is that when we weld, this circle represents the actual weld filling up that gap. So instead of this, and we were to grind off the top of that to make it flat because we're working on an outside panel, you lose a lot of the strength that you're doing, and you're not getting the same sort of penetration as you do when you do this. So by leaving that little gap and welding between it, it means that we can take off that outer part of the weld. We'll be left with a nice clean surface, but we're still left with all of this strength in the back of the weld. And that is why you use butt weld clamps when you're doing this sort of metal work. If you think I'm wrong, if there's a better way to do it, drop me a comment and let me know. What I've learned about welding is that this is just kind of the start of what we need to do on this outer panel. You need so much patience. There's got to be 200 welds in here that have needed individually cooling as I've gone through to make sure that we don't get the warp. However, now that it's on, I'm going to work on taking off all the tops on the welds on the outside, ensuring that we've got all the strength that we need there. I've welded in on our rear joining strip that joins onto the back of the shell as well, so that's all done. I've left the bottom of the arch for now, and that's just clamped nice and tightly. So what we'll do is we'll take off the top of these welds. I'm going to use a stone wheel, and then I'm going to use a sanding flap wheel as well. I've never used the flap wheel before, but so I'm keen to see if we can get a good finish with that. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love it if you could subscribe. If not, drop me a comment and let me know what you'd like to see instead. we're then going to have to look at the shape of the other wheel arch on the other side and see if we can get a pattern off that, so we can just make sure that we've got the curve on this panel, because the Mini tends to kind of go like that and then up. So it's got a bit of a hip that comes through here, and that will be the next thing to figure out today. 3 days. 3 days, that's how long it's taken to get that panel fitted on the car. And I'm finally in a place where I'm quite happy with it. So let me show you my progress. Boom. Now I'm holding this by hand just to try and get you some angles on it, but it is looking really, really good. You know, this is anything I think needs a skim coat in the end, but I'm not going to be trying to fix the shape of this because I haven't fitted the panel correctly. And if I knew what I knew now, I probably wouldn't have cut the arch quite as high as I did. So let me show you a couple of things. The Mini, as I mentioned before, has a bit of a hip on it, and the replacement panel is a curve, but the rest of it is straight. Now, what I would have done is I would have gone up and cut where that change in geometry on the panel had happened, rather than cutting as high as I have done and then having to come up with new and unique ways to basically get this looking right. And I'll just get out of frame so I can show you a bit better, but there we go. I'll come into the car, and if we get down there, you can almost see the curves of the car, and I'll come around the other side, and all of this has had to be worked in, so we've got that nice curve back on the car, which I am super proud of. Like, it wasn't a job I thought I was going to do. You know, I thought we were just going to be putting in a couple of patches on that corner, but that didn't work. But I'll show you a couple of things that have really helped me with this job. One of them is one of these. Now, I bought this to work on my house, and it's actually perfect for working on the car, because it meant I could come in here and I could get my lines, and then I could come around the other side and I can measure up. And if I show you, we're not far off. There's a little bit, about 3 or 4 mil at the bottom, couple of mil at the top. So that shows that either side of the car is slightly differently to each other. But that's allowed me to be confident about my manipulation in terms of knowing that I'm working to the right shape. Another random thing for metalworking, crowbar. So I've wrapped either end of this, and a friend of mine, Ian, told me to do this. And the reason is you want to kind of be able to get in these gaps and really kind of get a bit of leverage, but you never want sharp edges. You never want to kind of manipulate your metal in a way that is going to give you any sharp edges, because that's just going to ruin everything. The third and final Joshua's random tool for the day is a hammer. Now, the end of this has come off, but can you see that bit there? It's a rubber hammer, but I put that on the end of it, and that is one microfiber cloth inside with another one wrapped around the outside. And the reason for that is, again, when I was working on this back edge of the car, I was trying to get behind the panel, and I was using the heel of my hand to kind of massage this out, and I realized very quickly that I needed more energy in there to get that curve right and to be able to work with that. So a good way to do that, a rubber hammer, couple of microfiber towels, and that allowed me to get the force in there but stop doing any damage. And weirdly, I know I said only 3, but there is another fourth one that I didn't think I would be telling you about. But when I was working this metal, after about 2 hours, I realized that I could use my light to look for changes in the surface of your metal. So as you're manipulating the metal, you can look to see where the light changes. And it meant little divots like just here, where you can see my wire brush hadn't previously caught. I could get on that and I could look for that change in light. And as it happened, it meant that I knew that the light was following a continuous curve rather than changing angle. So I hope that's been of some interest to you and it helps you with your project. Drop me a comment, let me know what you're doing. But boom, that is another panel done on the tar. No, wait, there's one final tool. Last one. I can't believe I'm actually going to show you this as a tool, but I needed a way to figure out how to kind of apply pressure and do it so I wasn't just pushing on one spot. Now, what I came up with is this. This is a wheel for a table that I haven't built yet, but it's made of a very hard plastic. Yeah, it's not a rubber. I don't know why I'm listening to it. No, still plastic. And because it's hard and because it allows me to put force on the panel but also roll the panel at the same time, it meant that I could kind of distribute that push as I went round rather than worrying that I was going to get little hills and divots from trying to push individual bits at the same time. So again, use what you've got around you and think about how your metal's going to be needed to be manipulated. And yeah, the most random things you will find that work really, really well for fabrication. I think I'm about to do something stupid, but kind of bored with where the Mini's been for the last 3 months. So, right, Josh, you're not 20 anymore, but let's see if... Don't get tired, don't get tired. Don't get tired, don't get tired. Okay, this is not where I want it to be. Right, maybe forwards a bit. Right, we can. Woo. Okay. Oh, right. Just stay there a second. Mental. Look at that. My plan's to kind of move it forwards a bit, but holy shit, it's really weird to see it not here. 3 months of grinding and welding and swearing all in this one spot. At least my back hasn't gone yet. What shall I name the Mini? I'm thinking new name, as it's currently named after the old owner, who I'd rather forget about as quickly as possible, to be honest. I was thinking Rookie One. Rookie One might be a good name. Or maybe something out of one of my childhood movies. So I was thinking maybe Falcor, or I did think Artex, but we've already ended up in the mud, so I think that might be a bit of a bad omen. I've just realised this is the closest I'm ever going to get to driving it at the moment. Fuck. Oh, okay. Running out of steam. Nearly there. Now, the reason why I've done this is I think we're probably at the point where I'm going to need to drop the front subframe with the engine. So that's kind of the next plan, but here's our new spot. It's looking good. Another episode completed on the Mini. So what do you think? How well do you think I got on with putting on this panel? There's still a little bit of work to do, but I'm really, really happy with my first attempt at doing an outer panel on a classic Mini. Moving forwards, I think it's time to start considering what we're going to do with the front of the car, and that was one of the reasons why I've turned it around, because we may be dropping that engine and gearbox to get the whole car lifted. We're simply so far into the project, we may need to overcommit before we get to any sort of painting. And another random thing, it's going to be very strange to see this car in another colour. But what did I choose? For now, I'll leave you to it, and I'll catch you next time. Bye guys.